Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, we've been inspecting fields this week. Hear about what we're watching for that can affect your crop's growth. Crops are emerging and it's been raining in the Midwest. Do you need to consider replant? Joe gives tips on what to do to maintain yield potential if you plant later in the season.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben and we also have Lynn. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the field this past week, so we want to start with Ben.
Yeah, so today we've been out, or not today, this week we've been out and kind of looked at different fields and we've been on some replant calls, and we're going to start the episode off with talking a little bit about insects. So I believe that I'm on the cusp of believing that we probably have had another mild winter, so insects are going to be a little bit more of a challenge this year. It seemed like every cold snap that we had, the prolonged cold that we've had snow covering the ground beforehand. So if we had a 2-week 0-degree temperatures in this area of the tri-states, it would have had a 4 or 5 inch wet snow ahead of it insulating the ground, so we didn't really get a lot of the super cold freezing to push back some of our insect pressure. So we have been seeing, I'm going to throw some pictures up here, we have been seeing some white grubs when we're doing some digging. We've been seeing some feeding on soybeans that may have been pulling stands back a little bit. We've talked with our seed treatment provider, and they believe that the insect pressure is just so large this year that you're going to be seeing just a little bit of pressure, even though the imidacloprid that we use, the gaucho that we use on the soybeans protects. There's got to be a little bit of feeding to kill those pests that we have out there. So like I said, there's a handful of pictures here that kind of showing you what we're seeing out in the field this year so far. And you went out on a replant call, or not even a replant call, but a customer was concerned, Lynn, this week. Talk a little bit about what you saw this week.
Yeah, so I went out and looked. They thought they had some feeding on some beans and thought it was the bean leaf beetle. And went out and looked, and throughout the field you could find some feeding that was very mild. And you know, when we get into defoliation of plants, it's always one of those where it looks a lot worse than what it actually really is. So this one, there was pockets that was pretty good feeding on the true leaf. As we got into the new growth, the feeding definitely ceased. Kind of makes the beans look a little bit ugly as they're going through that stress. A little bit of modeling on it. I did find one bug while I was out there, but it looked like they'd probably already had moved on through, and it was from the adult side of it that, you know, we're seeing the above ground feeding. I pulled some plants and didn't see anything where, you know, maybe the larva was below causing some problems. So check that out. Kind of getting a little bit of you know, some reports of that being more widespread than just that localized area, but for the most part, you know, no growing points were affected. The beans are coming out of it. It's just maybe slowing our progress and taking care of a little bit of the population, like you alluded to.
Yep, so we're seeing that as bean leaf beetles overwinter as adults. So the things that we want to really watch for is the soybean modeling, because that modeling can stunt growth and it can affect the soybean throughout the year. Imidacloprid gaucho is another insecticide that is supposed to work 30 days after planting. The advantage for the imidacloprid is it's less soluble than some of the other competition out there for insecticides, and it is systemic versus contact, so that plant actually imbibes the imidacloprid, and when animals feed on that, insects feed on that, the insect will either become sleepy for certain insects or it will actually kill. So on the bean leaf beetles, I think that was probably an really early planted field for the area.
Would have been, yep.
So if it's the earliest planted field in the area, the bean leaf beetles will have a tendency to migrate towards that field. So that's probably in April.
Into April, I think, was the, I'm going to say like
the 25th maybe?
Somewhere around there, yeah. And on that one too, with how that beetle lives or its life cycle, you know, they like grass or like green. They overwinter in hay or CRP, and this had some of that around it. So probably overwintered in the hay ground. First green up was soybeans, and they took advantage of that. And like I said, it's right across the road. What's it, like 150 yards is really kind of the circle they like to go to. So any of our guys that have, you know, hay ground around or CRP or some kind of grass, I'd definitely be on the lookout for that.
Yep. Perfect. What else have you been seeing this week?
We are in a kind of a crazy time where we're looking at some first plant stuff to go in. We're looking at replant that's going on. Some of the stuff that's jumped out as far as the replant goes is we're seeing a little bit of PPO damage. Around this area, we had just west of here a pretty good rain event that caught these beans in probably the worst possible time. We had a really terrible March and April as far as to being able to get in and put pre's down, get field work done. So to say that the end of April and May has been chaotic for both the farmers and our retail guys, our sprayer operators, has probably been an understatement. So the ones that we're really seeing it are like right before the planter. So basically the sprayer and the planter pass each other going into the field entrance, or right afterwards. And we've had a little dabble of rain events, but probably nothing that really got that chemistry working. And then we had a big rain event. So I'm seeing it on both stuff that was emerging and stuff that came out of the ground. The stuff that was already out of the ground, I think we're fine. The growing points seem to be, still intact, and we're putting on new growth. The stuff that was coming out of the ground, we burnt the top of the necks as they've come out. Not a widespread event, but you definitely can tell your low-lying areas where that PPO settled out, that it did a pretty good number on it. Looking at probably have to replant in those situations just because it's a big enough pool in that scenario. So unfortunate part of it, Mother Nature really didn't do us any favors on any part of that end of it. So and then you went out and looked at some too with crusting, that with these rain events we're also turning our ground into concrete in that first, would you say, quarter to half inch?
Yep, I've even seen 1.5 inch crusts. So about 85% of our replants so every replant that we get goes across my desk first and then Joe's desk, and we look for Pythium. We look for dampening off, so it'd be Pythium or Phytophthora. What we can see from the pictures our sales managers take of individual seedlings, and then of how big of an area in the field it looks like. And this is to help us try to make more informed decisions, make sure our seed treatment's working the way we want it to be working. But 85%, and that's just a rough guess, is of crusting issues this year. So what are some of the things that we can do to prevent crusting? What are some of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at all of these crusting issues is I bet we have some pretty high magnesium levels out in these fields. So getting out there and knowing not only what your pH is, but what your calcium percentage is out in those fields could be beneficial to the farmers and us. We're invested in their replant decision as well. So being out there and looking at your calcium levels and wanting those levels to be, if you're getting results from Midwest labs, wanting those levels to be in the 70, 71, 72% range. Those higher calcium levels will help that soil not run together as fast. And that's really what we're looking at for a lot of the pictures. The soil runs right back together. It can form an inch and a half crust. Also not working the ground too fine. I think some of the inline turbo till style of tillage implements do a nice job of not turning the ground into powder, but there have been a few of the fields that I've looked at that it looked like they're probably planted into like what appeared to be a garden. For sure. And then you get a 2.5 inch rain, and you can see exactly where the tillage line was, and that's what the soybeans are having to push through.
It's nothing out of the unusual this year. I mean, it seems like we go through it every year, and got to make notes to remember what's the right thing to do next year. Now, if you do have to replant, if you narrow your rows down to 15 inch or 7 or even 20s, that's like planting in 30 inch rows 2 weeks earlier for our yield potential, because ideally you want that canopy to occur as fast as possible this time of year by the longest day of the year, so you can maximize your sunlight usage. Now's a good time to increase your planting rates too. Ben, what do you think?
I'm sitting somewhere in that 150 to 160,000 range. So this week we'd have rolled over into the month of June. So June 1st I'm at 160,000. June 15th I'm at 160 to 180,000. By July I'm in that 180 to getting closer to 200,000.
As you know, soybeans are short day plants. They mature as the days get shorter. So we're coming up on the longest day of the year, which means the vegetative state will stop, and then they'll start going into reproduction, start flowering and potting. So what you're going to end up doing when you plant later is you get short plants because they have a shorter period for vegetative growth. So what you do, you substitute by putting more plants out there. Again, it's all about the number of nodes out there. The more nodes you have, the more places you got to hang pods, the more yield potential. So narrow down because you're going to have shorter plants, increase population, and then that will catch you back up from, like, for example, on May 1st planting.
Yep. And the increased population, another thing advantage to look at from the increased population is you have more soybeans next to each other to try to get that crust pushed through. Because we are going to start seeing more 90-degree soil, 90-degree temps. Lots of wind has been happening, and that's what's causing the crusting to happen. So more buddies sitting next to it helps push the crust better.
And you get better weed control too, because as you get that canopy, that definitely makes a difference on weed control. So those are some of the basic tips to understand what you need to do as it gets later to catch back up and maintain that yield potential. We were talking to a farmer yesterday. He planted in June,
early June,
and he still had 60 bushel soybeans. So, this is still optimum time to still raise some really good soybeans. He plants some 15-inch rows. So, there's still good yield potential left planting now. And the other thing too is, don't get excited about switching your varieties up. In other words, soybeans are different than corn. Soybeans will compensate. In other words, for every week that you delay in planting, it's usually only 1 day delay in maturity. So stay with your full season beans. You want the maximum vegetative growth with your full season beans. In fact, as it gets later, you actually want to switch to later soybeans.
Yep. All depends on what your harvest priority is, but yes, for a yield standpoint, if you are regularly at a 3.6, we're probably pushing you to a 3.9 once we get into the middle of June.
We did that trial at our place there where we talked about with the replant that ended up being in June and planted with Kennedy's on it and needed to finish up, and what was available was the Austin and a little bit of Norfolk. And it was almost a 15 bushel difference going with the fullest season possible on that late planted stuff. So
what would have been the replant date on that?
That would have been June 8th.
Yep. So that shows what being a little bit more patient at harvest can do. 15 bushel at $12, $13 soybeans makes a big difference.
For sure.
Yeah, so it's just the opposite of corn. Usually corn, they move earlier, mainly for dry down, not for yield, obviously. But you can catch yield back up with soybeans by saying go as full season as you got guts to go with. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And we've had some really good falls. The last few falls, we really haven't had our killing frost in our area. It's normally October 15th, and we've really pushed that back a week or two. So, when Mother Nature's kind of messes with us in the spring, it kind of helps us out in the fall. Let's hope so. Knock on wood, right?
That's right.
I think you're exactly right what you said about learning from our mistakes, because it seems like this is the at least third year where we've had springtime conditions that have led to these issues, and boy, it sure doesn't seem like we're running away from it. Maybe it's kind of the new norm to have a wetter spring, at least in this area.
Yep.
I think our planting window, our perfect planting window this year once again was like 5 days, where it looks like you really had phenomenal stain, everything came out, perfect emergence. Last year was 2 days, 3 days, so very important. Like what Joe said is, learn from your mistakes and don't repeat them. Granted, Mother Nature has to help us out a little bit on that.
Yeah, and the rains have been so spotty. I mean, like we get this time of year, one place can have a half inch, and then 10 miles away they had 2.5 inches. And that's what we're seeing this year. So locally here around West Point, it's pretty much been a garden spots right now. We haven't had too much rain, but if you go 6 miles away from here, it's a different ball game, isn't it?
Yep.
And that would be my house.
You know what they say, Lynn. If we wouldn't grow it outside, we wouldn't have all these problems. But all I can tell you is that it's nothing new. We can fight through it again, but it sure is stressful. Anything else?
Busy week.
Yeah, busy week. I know, spending a lot of time finalizing everything for 2023 for me. So we're getting ready to start it all over again. As soon as the planters pull out, we get ready to start all over again, and that's always a fun time. So looking forward to getting this year wrapped up. So let's get to the corny jokes. Had a little help this week. Dory, who works with us in the marketing area as one of our agencies, sent me a little 100 cheesy jokes, which, cheesy, corny, works together, So anyhow, I pulled a few out of there, so we'll see how these go over. What did the grape say when it got stepped on? What did the grape say when it got stepped on? Nothing. It just let out a little whine. Okay.
I actually had that one.
There you go. Okay. How do you shoot a killer bee? How do you shoot a killer bee? With a BB gun. Okay. And now we'll wrap it up here. Okay. What kind of photos do crabs take? What kind of photos do crabs take? Shelfies. Okay. There you go. Well, hopefully maybe cracked a smile on one of those. But again, as always, we hope you and your family are safe. And we hope everybody in your family is healthy. And again, we thank you for your business this past year. And we look forward to working with you next year. We'll see you next week.